So we pick up right after the events of John Wick Chapter 3, Parabellum, which despite seeing very recently, I don't remember the end of, because the events at the very beginning of John Wick 4 lead off of the previous film, and I just could not remember where we were. But the plots of all the John Wick movies is basically the same. He is an assassin in this underworld of assassins, and he is persona non grata. There is a contract out for his name. He is trying to shoot and kill his way to the top and get out of the life, get out of the lifestyle. But he's got to kill a whole lot of people to get there. Along the way, we meet some fun new characters. We meet Donnie Yen's Kane, who's a blind assassin who's brought in to take down John Wick himself. We have Bill Skarsgård, who is the Marquis de Gramont, who is the kind of just new, large and in charge big bad in the movie. And then we have some familiar faces. We have Lawrence Fishburne as the Bowery King, who's like the homeless assassin leader, and Ian McShane as the hotelier of the Continental. There's a whole lot of lore, strangely, in these movies. It gets really into like the world and the rules and the relationships and the traditions, which is funny. It's always funny to me that there's these assassins who murder people, but they're like, no, we have rules we have to live by.
Of course.
But that's our setup. It's almost 3 hours long. It's a lot of fun. Zach, what'd you think?
So going into Shazam, going into John Wick 4, I was thinking I was going to get two things. Number one, very good action, right? That's what John Wick is praised for. That is fundamentally the legs that have carried the series as far as it's gotten. I figured that action was going to be great. And number two, I was not going to understand the plot because I knew it gets weird. I've seen the first half of one, and I never really got through the rest of it. I fell asleep. All right, it's not complicated. And I haven't seen 2 or 3, but I know it gets a little kooky. And when we went and saw this, we went to Alamo Drafthouse, love Drafthouse. And when we walked in during the pre-show, they had this like explainer of like, here's a reminder of everything that happens in the John Wick series up to John Wick 4. So you're ready right before the movie starts. And we walked in halfway through them explaining John Wick 3. And I was like, I have no idea what is going on. I know there's this family and a table and Ian McShane's in it and Lawrence Fishburne's in it, and I don't really know what's going on, but I know it's complicated, right? And so I figured getting into this, that would be the case. I feel very good in saying, as a new viewer of John Wick, it is not that complicated. Thank God. Like they appeased me. It's not too twisted. There's a lot of characters, but all the relationships are really simple. It's not actually that dense on dialogue, and the action really is better than I thought it would be. Like, fantastic work. John Wick 4 is a lot of fun, despite the insane runtime, and that is high praise from Off Script. Despite the nearly 3-hour runtime, this is a fun movie, but it is. John Wick 4 is great. I'm excited to talk about it. I need to go watch the other movies.
Right. So I'll start with the runtime, because I was a little skeptical about this too. I was like, it's going to be too long. There's no way they can keep your interest. But it actually does manage to do that. And they do that by just moving it along quickly. They don't have a lot of like slow and dead parts. Like there's action, but it also is just paced really well. I started to feel the time a little bit like halfway through the 3rd hour, but up until then, it just moves along really quickly. And we find John Wick going to Japan and to the Japanese Continental Assassin Hotel, where we meet Hiroyoko Sanada's character, who he's good friends with. And that's the other thing. John Wick has friends in the industry, and
John Wick knows everybody.
Yeah. And there's this thing about debts, and you'll see a lot more of that in the 2nd and 3rd ones. Is about like, no, I did this thing, and here's this item, this token that signifies our blood pact that you have to help me in this time. So it just moves that when we get exciting set pieces in Japan, in Berlin, in the whole last third, I think is in Paris. And so it just moves along and has a really good pace despite the runtime.
I think a lot of the plot in this film, is lifted by just how fun the action sequences are. Because not only are there many, they're long. They're long sequences. I saw somebody clock one of the fights in this movie, one of the ones towards the end, at over like 35 minutes from like first bullet fired to the last one, which is insane. And like being able to keep that pace effectively and not just constantly stepping on the gas is done with good choreography, fantastic stunt work, and decent like little breaks in there, right? Like when John's got to reload or he's got to change weapons or somehow adapt to his situation. And like it makes for exciting action that's laid on top of a plot that is a little dense. Like as a newcomer, there's definitely some relationships I didn't really get. I didn't really understand who these people were. I knew John Wick was in trouble and somebody's trying to get him. That's pretty much what I needed to know going in. And what's funny is a lot of that goofier stuff, a lot of the like, you owe me a blood debt, the family at the table, the Marquis, whatever. Like a lot of that does read on the page like pretty goofy. But like, I don't know, like a photo that like you turn the saturation all the way up, like you can't help but like what you're seeing because it looks so good. Like fantastic set pieces, great production, like great what am I trying to do? Great sound stages they're shooting on at production design. Like this movie was expensive. And like every dollar is on screen. Like even when he like John is just like in a room chatting with Donnie Yen. Like if you're watching the Facebook Live, you can see it. Like they're in a cathedral with 1,000,000 candles. Like just for the simplest thing. So even like a conversation that isn't like particularly exciting, like is just visually gorgeous to chew on. Like, and that I think is such a great barrier for somebody who's new and doesn't really know like what exactly they're getting into, because you don't have to worry so much about who owes who what. Like it's not that complicated. Like
Yeah.
like
Just
the bullet
watch
time
and
in
you'll
Tenet.
know.
Yeah, don't overthink it. Like just watch it and enjoy what's on display here.
So what I wanted to say about this first act is that there's a lot of like kung fu movie tropes that are thrown in that like that's what the first third, almost the first half feels like when they're in Japan, because there's like, oh, you know, I get the blind swordsman, which is basically Kane's character, Donnie Yen, and then just the way characters talk to each other. There's like the old friends turned enemies. There's the you killed my master, I have to get revenge. There's all it's heavily influenced.
Blackmail. Oh yeah.
But by old kung fu movie genres and tropes and modernized and put into this world, and it just works so well. It works so much better than I had thought. Like I turned to Zach during this first act right before the first big action set piece, and I was like, oh my god, it's about to start. It's about like
it's about
the
to go
build
down.
up. The build up is so good in that first act, and it just also just looks so cool. Like the John Wick universe has done a good job of making everything look like the coolest thing you ever saw.
Yeah, this obviously is due to, I think, the fantastic direction of Chad Stahelski, who's at the helm once again. He's directed all of these features. Before that, he had directed nothing. He's a stuntman. That is primarily where he comes from, stunts. So when he makes a movie, he's like, it's going to be stunt heavy. And it is. In fact, one of the things that surprised me about John Wick 4 is how little Keanu Reeves' character actually speaks. I think he has the least speaking lines out of any of these movies. That's what I'd read somewhere. Maybe not by time, I should say. John Wick 1 probably has less lines just because it's a shorter feature. But he doesn't talk a lot. And it kind of works perfect. I was reminded very much of like early Terminator. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger could not do big drama, right? Like when he wanted to get into acting, but he was a big burly man who looked bad, right? Like you did not want to mess with this guy, and he did good action. So for Terminator 1, they were like, hey man, you don't have to talk a lot. You're going to have very few lines. In fact, if you're kind of low and rumble, like that'll be fine. And it'll have better effect when you do speak. You're just going to focus on action. And Keanu Reeves is kind of in the same boat. He doesn't need to talk a lot. This is the fourth feature, and it made more money than any of the prior ones, by the way. Like clearly people are not showing up for his epic line delivery. In fact, some of those don't even work that good. What works well is how awesome he is in all of his action scenes. I mean, not only is he getting beat up on camera, and I read somewhere he said he did like 90% of his stunts. Don't know how approximate that is. But like a lot of these stunts aren't only big, effective set pieces. They're long takes. Like multiple minutes on screen, moving through rooms, clearing areas, like really cool ideas. Getting hit by cars. God, he gets hit by cars a lot in this movie, which apparently happens in a couple of the other movies.
Yeah.
John Wick is like, dude, he gets beat to a pulp.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with him, and Chad Stahelski was also part of the interview. Apparently, he's so good at the stunt work. He's like almost as good as the stuntman. Like a lot of the driving, he just does. He can do himself. Like he can do like the reverse 180s in the car. He can drift it, and like so they're like, well, we could use a stuntman, and maybe they do because of insurance, but like he can do it at just as well, and just because he's been doing it for so long, he's been an action star for so long, but especially these movies where it's a kind of specific type of gun fu that they call.
I do think one thing worth mentioning is like just how deep the bench is for the cast list. There's a lot of characters, which at first was confusing just because I was like, who exactly are we working with here? And on top of, like Keanu Reeves, right, the titular. I know Andy already mentioned a bunch of them, but worth mentioning again, Donnie Yen, Lawrence Fishburne, late Lance Reddick. I had it up on IMDb, but then I lost it. Clancy Brown, Ian McShane, Bill Skarsgård, really fantastic group of people. Hiroki Sanada, Shamir Anderson, an exciting new role. And one thing I think I liked is not only does it not go to the trouble to explain every little thing about every person here, it also does not necessarily like wrap up perfectly everybody in a bow, because as the movie says, this is a chapter. This is like one of what is supposed to be a larger story, right? This is one thin slice. And honestly, like a lot of good old action movies, like they don't have to explain who everybody is, right? I don't need to know the backstory behind every guy on the helicopter in Predator. I just need to know what they're going to do and that they're all big bad dudes and that things are going to happen. Like, and John Wick 4 managed to thread that needle really well. Like it manages to give us people who are exciting, very charismatic. They do rad things, and then they kind of duck out. And all right, cool. Like we're on to our next thing. It makes a 3-hour feature feel like more of a ride because you don't know what's coming around each corner. And like surprisingly, that doesn't end up feeling rote. That doesn't end up feeling stale. It ends up feeling like a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's one of the real impressive things about this movie is it is a big cast, but every time you see a new person, you're going to recognize them every time they come back on screen. Like Kane is blind. He wears these sunglasses. He actually had CGI sunglasses in the first scene, which I thought was hilarious. Like,
I didn't place that. That's great.
To avoid glare, they definitely had some CGI on his lenses. But you know, he's the blind swordsman, and he fights. He's in charge of things, but he also fights, and he's like he's like Daredevil basically. Clancy Brown, who is the Harbinger. Clancy Brown's a big guy. He's like 6'6", and again, you know him every time. Bill Skarsgård is the Marquis, immaculately dressed. They do such a good job of introducing new people, having them be really different characters and looks, and you remember all of them throughout the movie.
One thing I wanted to mention before I kind of wrap up, because I am running out of things to say, but I want to talk about things that are memorable in this feature, because I was thinking about like 2 hours into it. You've seen a few set pieces. You've seen more than a few action scenes at this point. Like you've seen some rad stuff, and there's really great visuals and really great set design and really great actors. And I was thinking like, what's going to jump out here that I'm going to remember in like a decade, right? Like not like memorable, like you're doing dishes next week and you remember, oh yeah, is that cool scene in John Wick 4 or something that like really is exciting. Like what's going to happen here that's really different? Keep an eye out for a scene. It's an action set piece in the third act that is really stunning work. Like, man, if they could do more creative things like that, I'd be really excited. And I don't know if the other John Wick movies have that, but one thing I do know John Wick 3 had was a lot of mysticism, which I'm hearing. I don't know. Andy, did people go for that then? Because that's not really present here, and I think it's better for it.
So the second movie, I think, hits the sweet spot if it gets into the lore a lot more, but it's not ridiculous. The third one kind of goes off the deep end, and he like goes on this, drug-fueled trip out to the desert to some guy who sits above the table, and he makes a deal with him to, so he doesn't die and then gets back into it. It gets really kind of weird in that third movie, and they dialed it back here to be more about like relationships and debts and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it might be I think it's a really good mix. I'd be anxious to go watch John Wick 2. I'm sure 3 is fine, but like I said, I saw the last half of that little explainer, like, here's everything that happens in John Wick movies. And 3 looks real intimidating on the surface. Like, oh God, it looks like there's a lot going on there, but I don't know. It's probably not that bad. All in all, I had a lot of fun with this movie. I think I'm ready for recommendations. Andy, any other thoughts?
Well, the last thing that we have to talk about is, of course, the action.
Of
That's
course.
why it's the big sell. That's the main reason people go.
Absolutely.
I was a little worried because I was like, well, I've seen 3 of these movies. Is it going to get old? Am I going to get tired of watching John Wick beat people up? And it really doesn't, because they find new and exciting ways to kind of present these things. They have these really cool sets. Like I said, the first third is like a kung fu movie, and there's no guns. It's all like bladed weapons, arrows, like that kind of things. You got really cool bad guys to fight. It's almost too cool. I was saying this, I was like, I think that opening, it's like a 20-minute action sequence. I think that's actually kind of the coolest part in the movie, in the first act. But sorry, there's just so many different set pieces, and they're all so good. There's fights in Paris. There's a fight in a club in Berlin, and they just keep it interesting. There's cars, there's guns, there's fisticuffs, there's, like I said, bow and arrow, bladed weapons, everything else, and it's just it keeps you excited the whole time.
Yeah, it's really something else. Like I really, I think the action and really the production design like is jumped out at me in this movie. Some of those fight scenes are like in the most bananas of places. Yeah, this like art gallery hotel in Japan with this like insane lighting that flows out the whole place. That Berlin dance like nightclub is so great. It's like it's like in this room that's like covered in waterfalls and like people are dancing despite like insane amount of gunfire, like just bananas, like just wild stuff. And yeah, anytime I thought this is too goofy, I didn't care because like I would see something that was subsequently awesome and it wouldn't matter. I mean, it's like if you turn something mediocre all the way up to 11, you stop caring that it's mediocre because it isn't anymore. Suddenly it's turned up to 11 and it's really fantastic. And like that and tremendous action makes John Wick 4 a really fun time. Like I really enjoyed it. Any other thoughts?
No, I'm ready.
Andy, would you recommend John Wick Chapter 4?
Absolutely. Highly recommend. Especially if you're a fan of the series, you're going to love it. The runtime isn't too long despite being almost 3 hours. It's exciting. It's fun. It's got a lot of dark humor. We got a lot of fun new characters. It keeps you engaged the whole time. And if you've never seen a John Wick movie before, you can just jump right in. Like that's the really great and kind of unique thing about it.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, having not seen any of these movies, I can say confidently it is intimidating because it feels like there's a lot of lore and that runtime is scary. Don't worry about it. It's not going to bother you at all. It's a ton of fun. And I think if you're a John Wick fan, you're going to be really pleased with it. Whether you go for the mysticism or not, like, I think this movie does something really cool. I can't wait for what's next. I know they're talking about a universe now, right? Like Ana de Armas is doing a thing, and I heard something about a limited series they want to make. Like this is quickly getting eaten by the Hollywood machine and becoming like a multifaceted universe. I'm gonna have to go back and watch 2 and 3, and I guess 1. I didn't need to go back and watch 1, but I feel like 1 has got to be so far removed from the movie I just saw, right? Like there's no way.
It was a tiny film. It's
Yeah.
a tiny film. Like the action isn't as good. The effects aren't as good. It's a little bit of a chore to get through. And I mean, that movie's almost 10 years old now, so it's a little dated in its look. But the second one is really good. The third one is really good production wise. It just gets kind of weird. But other than that, it's phenomenal. We're going to be getting a lot more of the John Wick universe for years to come.
Yeah, like 1, I think, is such a simple idea that you could spoof it, right? With somebody like Nobody starring Bob Odenkirk, which was a fine movie, by the way. But like nobody can spoof this. Like John Wick 4 is doing something really tremendous, and it's good stuff. I can't wait to see more. And speaking of things we want to see, we got to talk about trailers. So some upcoming stuff. Andy, you mind introing this for me?
It's time for the trailer part.